Of the County Commissioners. This is the 17th day of October 2017. Thank you for being here. We apologize. We're usually very prompt. We're about 5 minutes late tonight. We had a lengthy work session that got us right to the hour and had some discussions there to do about some text amendments we're working on for this meeting. You'll see that coming up in our public hearing. Again, you're welcome here. Thank you for being here. We appreciate all of you coming. First thing on our agenda tonight, as usual, is the invocation. We have the senior pastor, Pastor Jeffrey Hartman of First Baptist Church. He's kindly new to the community, but he's made himself right at home. How about coming up here and praying us into this meeting? It's good to see you again, Pastor, and we appreciate the works you're doing.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let us pray. God, we thank you for the land in which we live. We thank you for the freedom that we enjoy and too often take for granted. We thank you for the gift of government. We thank you for these servants. You call them in Romans 13, ministers of God, servants of God who serve the citizens. We thank you for the work that they do, your work really, on earth. Lord, I pray tonight as they meet together that you would give them wisdom, that you would give them your guidance. We thank you for the work that they do on our behalf, for our schools, for our aged, for our youth. Lord, we pray that you will give them wisdom and direction, and Lord, that you would help us as your citizens in this county, in this country, to be of support to them. Lord, we pray for all that goes on in this place tonight, as it says up on the wall and on our money. In you we trust, for your leadership, your guidance, your protection. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. We appreciate you.
Bless you down there. Whoever that will sneeze.
Next thing on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Woodard.
If you are able, please rise and join us in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need to approve our agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Copeland. Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Matheny. Thank you, sir. Are there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is the public forum, and I don't think we had anybody to sign up, but we don't limit because you didn't sign up. If anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand at the public forum. If we don't have anybody speaking at the public forum, then we'll forego the overviews of the rules and procedures. And Mr. Woodard, we have 4 public hearings. We may talk about those if we need to come time for those public hearings.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Next thing on our agenda is the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Got a motion from Commissioner Matheny. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Crisco. Thank you. Any discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We have on our agenda tonight 4 public hearings, and Mr. Manager and Mr. Planning Director, you'll have to sort of guide us. The first one is Board of Adjustments. Am I correct about that?
Yes, sir.
If that be the case in that one, and you can tell us the ones we need to deal with is Board of Adjustments. I know the last one is probably the Board of Commissioners. But we have 2 or 3 Board of Adjustments hearings, meaning that we'll recess the County Commissioners session and convene a session of the Montgomery County Board of Adjustments. Mr. Gayhagen, if you come forward, please, and go in order, if you will.
Chairman, if I may, just while Andrew's coming up, I'll give a little background on public hearing number 1. Let me first start by saying that Andrew Gayhagen is a true asset to the county. He's what you want a good planner to be. He upholds the ordinances of the county. The Board of Commissioners, they pass the laws of the county, and what they expect staff to do is to uphold those laws and to not to bend or use their personal opinion, and Andrew does that. And Andrew gets a lot of nasty comments when somebody wants to do something, and the law says you can't do it, and Andrew does not back down. And so we're proud that he's so upstanding. At the same time, Andrew tries to help people, and that's the combination you want for public servants, that they know their job, they know who makes the law, and they then try to help people find ways to get what they want. And this public hearing here before the Board of Adjustment for Mr. Carroll kind of exemplifies that as to what has happened. I got involved in this public hearing or this request from the homeowner after a series of back and forths over a period of months where the homeowner, as Andrew will explain what they were attempting to do, and the house we're wanting to build. When I got involved, you know, Andrew was exactly right in what he was telling the homeowner. Here's the county ordinance, here's how it applies. At the same time, Andrew had offered some solutions of how the person could get what they wanted. When I hear that, you know, it makes me think, is there a workaround to an ordinance? That's not what you definitely not what you don't want is somebody to be able to circumvent something through a series of steps here. And what Mr. Carroll's wanting is he's wanting to change the front of his parcel. Now, typically, that would be very hard to do because our ordinances are written that where you have the public right-of-way, where you have your driveway, the front setback is so many feet. It's less number of feet on the side and a different amount in the rear. Mr. Carroll's parcel is landlocked, and so it does not face a public fronting right-of-way. And he accesses his property down a private road off of 109. And so Andrew was telling him, well, if you go through these steps and make a secondary drive, then the back of your property becomes the side and so forth. And Andrew can explain all the details there. But again, when I got involved and I heard what the person was wanting to do, I stepped back and looked at what the intent of the ordinance was. The county has setbacks for what reason? And why is the front setback different than the sides or the rear? I believe the intent of that ordinance of having a greater setback on the front, one, is for public safety. Because for most parcels in the county, the front of your house is facing the road. And you do not want, for the safety of the motorists and the safety of the people at home, for the house to sit up into the road. That's why we have a greater setback on the front. The second thing is, to me, the intent of the ordinance was aesthetics. That you don't want to be driving down the road that feel like you're cramped in by these houses. And so I certainly agree with the front setback. The third thing, intent of the ordinance, is the value of your neighbor's homes. If your houses are all set back this far and then your neighbor puts his 15 foot ahead of yours, in essence, you look out your front window at their back porch. Well, nobody wants that. And so I think that is the purpose of the county's ordinance in setbacks, is why the front is larger than the sides and the rear. Mr. Carroll's property, however, is landlocked. There is no public road on the front of way that's going to meet that standard of public safety. You have to look at the parcel, and Andrew will go into detail about that, about the aesthetics of the neighborhood and how you access it down this private drive. And to me, when I looked at it holistically, I thought, you know, maybe this is one of those possible exceptions to an ordinance. You can't write an ordinance that's going to capture every scenario. You have to write an ordinance that captures the majority. And again, when you live on that public thoroughfare, I don't think there should ever be an exception to that. But I'm certainly sympathetic from that standpoint. Of course, Andrew, you know, asked me, well, can the board apply this to every scenario? I don't think every scenario is the same, but again, if you're landlocked and changing which side is the front of your parcel to allow you to build on the high ground, and I think Mr. Carroll will explain why he wants to build where he wants to build, that this is one of those scenarios that needs consideration by the board. Of course, Andrew and I, as I started off by saying, don't have the authority to change the law. And so when we talked to our attorney, Tom Terrell, Tom told us the correct venue would to bring it to the Board of Adjustment, who had the power to change this. And so that's a little bit of the background. I didn't mean to go into such length and detail, but now, Andrew, I will turn it over to you. And of course, Andrew's job is to uphold that ordinance and to say that it is not his recommendation per se, because he's following the ordinance. But, Andrew, thank you.
Mr. Gayhagen, I understand this is a little different from some of the things, but this is actually an appeal, correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay.
And
Go ahead, Mr. Gayhagen.
Actually,
Thank you.
about everything I had to touch on has been covered. It is an appeal of an administrative decision filed by the property owner, Mr. Carroll. He is requesting an appeal of the decision that determined where his front yard setback location is dictated. The parcel is located approximately 350 feet from Dark Springs Mountain Trail. There is no parcel identification number at this time. It was recently subdivided. It does take time to create those numbers. But it is defined as new tract C, which is shown on a plat F-187A, which is filed with the Register of Deeds and included in the agenda packet that was submitted. While the parcel itself is unique I should say uncommon, in that it doesn't have direct road frontage, this isn't really a unique situation. This has occurred several times before, which I've detailed in the agenda packet as attachments 1, 2, and 3. Those show similar administrative decisions where lots don't have direct road frontage and are accessed via an easement or private drive. In all situations, I followed the same standard. The front yard setback was dictated to be the property line between the addressed road, right-of-way, and the interior of the property. In reviewing this, there are certain situations where I can infer intent of the code. In this particular case, I don't feel that I have that authority to infer the intent. It's very clear to me where that front yard setback is, and I can't bend from what that ordinance says and still be following the letter of the law. Attachments 4 and 5 show subdivision plats for lots that have frontage to a named and addressed private road. A similar solution to move the setback legally in accordance with what the code states was sent to the surveyor Kevin Wall on August 24th, 2017, and that's included in the agenda packet as attachment 6. While that solution is clear how to fix that issue, it does come with some issues in and of itself. It would require the creation of a named private road. The front setback is dictated from between the addressed road right-of-way and that front property line. So it doesn't really matter where the access is, it's from where the address point is at. Again, an appeal is not typically for situations where the appellant believes the code is poorly written or the code should be changed, nor is appeal for situations where the appellant believes their property is unique in some capacity and there's a certifiable hardship that prevents them from locating the structure in compliance with the code. We do have established tools for that, one being a text amendment to actually change the code to take care of situations like this, or 2 being a variance request, a text amendment for which we'll be discussing here in a few minutes. The specific purpose for the appeal is to determine if the code itself was incorrectly interpreted by the enforcing authority. I can answer any questions the board might have on the issue. I think I've included everything in the agenda packet that kind of details the history of this item and what was decided and how it was decided.
Any questions from the commissioners?
Well, it's not clear to me what we're being asked to decide here.
The appellant is appealing the decision that if you go to that plat that's included in the agenda packet, I determined that the property line, the longest property line facing Dark Springs Mountain Trail was the front yard setback of 30 feet. The appellant is appealing that decision and has determined that he believes the front yard setback is actually the shorter end of the property that is closest to the private driveway. So he is requesting that the front yard setback as determined by me is appealed and determined that I was incorrect in that capacity and that the front yard setback is actually what he has determined to be the property line closest to that driveway. If you're looking at that document, it would be the property line marked 259.91. It would be that part of the property he's requested to be determined as the front yard.
Commissioner, Tom Terrell, our attorney, when we reviewed this case with him, he told us this was the proper venue, was to file this administrative appeal. While we don't question Andrew's interpretation based on the ordinance, Tom still said this would be the venue for the board to change it if the board saw fit, that you would not file a variance request hearing, that it was an appeal. And again, looking at this map that's page 17, Andrew has got the front of the parcel, the 30-foot setback here. Mr. Carroll is asking for the front to be here at the bottom, which is the closest point to the private Dark Springs Mountain Road. And I think Chairman, Mr. Carroll can probably explain why he wants the house there if you want to.
Mr. Carroll's here, and I think I saw him, yeah. Yep, we'll get to you, Mr. Carroll. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, sir.
But to be clear, if we find that Andrew is not incorrect, in other words, that he was correct in his interpretation, then we're denying what Mr. Carroll wants. Is that
That
correct?
would be right.
In order to grant what Mr. Carroll wants, we have to say that Andrew is wrong.
And that's perfectly fine. I don't expect to be right
No, I
every
mean,
time,
I'm just
most of the time.
It just
I'm sorry, Mr. Matheny, go ahead.
But the other alternative would be to file for a variance, and
No.
can't file for a variance.
Now, there's nothing to prevent filing of a variance. That is the due process of the applicant. It's a question of whether or not this specific case warrants the approval of a variance. There's nothing to prevent the applicant from applying. The question is whether or not the variance itself would be approved, whether there's a certifiable hardship of the property that would prohibit a variance from being approved. So we couldn't deny him applying for a variance request. That's his right to apply. It's a question of whether or not the variance request would be approved.
Okay, thank you.
Couple of questions, and Mr. Carroll, listen to these because you may want to address I may ask you again. I noticed that there was a certain amount of time a person has to appeal. Is that correct?
Correct. The state statute dictates that the appellant has 30 days from the receipt of the written notice to file for the appeal. In this case, it's kind of a question of when that written notice was received by Mr. Carroll. The decision I had made was conclusively made on February 14th of 2017. That was when the plat was recorded, when my signature was put on this document as making that decision of 30 feet. It can be reasonably argued that the decision was not made specifically to Mr. Carroll, but actually to the property owners at the time, Mr. Jones and Mrs. Jones. And the question is, when did Mr. Carroll get notified that this was the decision? On March 9th, the appellant did forward a copy of this recorded plat to the Montgomery County Environmental Health Department to use as a site plan for the purposes of permitting a wastewater system for a proposed home. That's been included in the agenda packet as attachment 7. Again, the document clearly shows a location of 30-foot setback that was determined by staff on February 14th. And I would feel it's kind of no reasonable argument exists to be made that the appellant wasn't aware of that location on March 9th because he used the document to draft the site plan for environmental health. If you follow that standard, the deadline date would have been April 8th of 2017 to file according to the state statute. But again, it's a question of when was the decision actually notified by or given to the property owner, Mr. Carroll.
Another question, this may or may not matter, that I would have is if I look at just that paragraph alone, have there been ongoing dialogue? I'm sure there has been with this matter.
Yes, there has been, but it doesn't go back to April 8th. And in fact, I do recall, and unfortunately I don't have anything written on this, but I do recall before this subdivision was ever created or executed, I did sit in my office and discuss it with Mr. Jones and Mr. Carroll where that setback would most likely be. And at that discussion, it was made that it's the addressed road frontage, and we did discuss it being that 30-foot on that side of the road. But again, I have no evidence to support that. I'm just telling you that we have met in the office, but there's no written report of that.
And last question I would have to you, and then Mr. Carroll, I'll give you an opportunity. I won't take any of your time. You'll get all the time you need. So it's incumbent on us to not find you right or wrong, which I think you're basically right in where you've assumed, but we've got a landlocked piece of property, and would you agree that this is a unique and unusual, not request, but circumstance? Because where is the road and where is the, I mean, I'm looking at the things that Mr. Woodard said prior to you coming up, is that this was the intent of what we're trying to do, but what, you know, we've got to figure out which is the back and which is the front, actually, right here today. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, I don't know if I would call it unique. I would call it uncommon. I guess
Uncommon,
unique,
okay.
you know, says there's only one. Uncommon says there might be a few. And I've included those in the packet. You know, similar situations where we've had parcels like this that are accessed via private driveway or a private easement, you know, that's not a unique feature. There's been several others like this that, you know, and again, I can't interpret intent. If there's a gray area of the code that gives me some administrative leeway, I can make that decision. But in this case, you know, the code's pretty well black and white, at least from, you know, where I'm sitting, that I couldn't make a determination otherwise.
All right, any other questions? Mr. Gahagan, anything else? Could we may call you back up? We may have some more dialogue with you. Anything, you gentlemen? All right, Mr. Carroll? And if you will, when you come up, please state your name and address, and anything that you want to tell us, you can, and we'll probably have some questions. How you doing tonight? We're glad you're here. Welcome.
My name's Jeff Carroll. I live in Lumber Bridge, North Carolina, 9000 NC 20 West.
Thank you.
Mr. Woodard pretty much stated everything. You know, it's pretty much, you know, in the appeal there. The only thing is, if I have to put my house on the front side of the 30-foot, I'll be looking at a guy's horse pasture over here. In other words, that's pretty much the way that angles that way. You know, if I build my house with the front, as he's stating on the 30-foot setback, and which is what I don't want to do. And also the house fits right where it is if I can get the setback that I'm asking for. I won't have to haul any dirt in, and, you know, the aesthetics would be a whole lot better, and won't have to build up way back in the back, because my property drops off. Once it leaves the area that we're talking about, it drops off tremendously because it's, you know, mountainous or hilly, you know, kind of hilly area. And that's pretty much, you know, a lot of the reasons that we're trying to get that done. And as far as the sample that he gave, or example he gave, coming in and being able to change it that way, there's already a road going to the property. And I'm not what you call a real tree hugger, but we're trying to keep that area down there private, and we just hate to clear out any more trees than what, you know, actually needs to be done, you know, to get access to the property. And, you know, that's pretty much the.
Don't go anywhere. Commissioners, questions? Mr. Carroll, we may have some more questions, but if we don't have any right now, if we do, we'll get you back up.
Okay.
We've got to let the public speak as well. Okay, this is a public hearing. This is the Board of Adjustments. Does anybody from the public like to speak on this particular matter?
Chairman, we did receive an email from a neighbor, and I apologize, I do not have the physical address of Mr. Don Jones.
Is
But
Mr.
he-
Jones here tonight?
No,
Don't
he
see
he
him.
just
Okay,
sent
thank
the email. He is, I will, in the absence of a physical address, I'll give his email address. I get don.jones@thermwood.com. In regards to your hearing at Montgomery County Planning Tuesday, October 17th, and as your adjoining property owner on the northern boundary, I want to support your house placement where you want it on your property.
Okay, will Mr. Jones be the seller of the property?
I think he was the original owner. I think
Was
he
he the
bought it
original
from
owner, Mr.
somebody else,
Okay,
but,
thank
not the original owner, but two owners back.
Okay. Now, does anyone like to speak on this particular issue? If not, Mr. Gahagan, anything else from you?
I do have Mr. Jones's address, if I can find it in this file. I have to notify as a requirement of the zoning code and state law, the adjacent and adjoining property owners. And there is a certificate of notification that's included every time I do that. Should be in here. Let's see. I saw it a few minutes ago. Well, it was in here.
Was this, appeal brought before the planning board, Mr. Gaines?
No, the appeal requirement is only to the Board of Adjustment. The planning board has no authority in this matter. There we go. The address of the property that Mr. Jones owns right now does not have an address. There's not a structure currently located on it. But the mailing address that I have for Mr. Jones for where he was sent his documentation is actually P.O. Box 980, Denton, North Carolina 27239. I don't have a physical address as far as where he lives, but that's the mailing address I took. So just a little more information for the record on him.
All right, anything else, Mr. Gayhagen?
No, that was the only item.
Mr. Carroll, anything else from you? Okay, it's up to our board now. Any discussion before we ask for the pleasure of the board?
I don't know if it makes any difference, but I know we've talked before, because I'm the new one on the board. You know, we've asked the question before, does it impact neighbors negatively? Or are we giving him an unfair advantage that somebody else hasn't got? I think this is a unique situation, so.
And the problem I have, and Mr. Gayhagen, forgive me for this, because it's not, I think you did a great job with this, is when you got a piece of property located where this one is, and the manner in which it's located, what is the front? And what is the back? That's, you know, you got, I think most of us may know the general vicinity, but it's a ways off of what's the name of the road, Mr. Carroll, that goes up there? Yes, Dark Springs Mountain Road, but you're a ways off of that road, up an easement, I assume.
Half a mile.
And the problem that I have is where is the front and where is the back? Which way you gonna place it, I guess. But we're looking for the pleasure of the board. If there's not any further discussion, please bring it up.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we grant the appeal. In other words, that we find that Mr. Gayhagen erred in his decision as to where the front of the property is, and the front of the property should be considered as Mr. Connor desires.
We have a motion to grant the appeal from Mr. Matheny. Do we have a second? Got a second from Commissioner Wooten. Are there any discussion?
Chairman, if I may, just for the sake of the other setbacks of clarifying where the front is, Andrew, give me the front would be which description? And that would establish the rear, that the Board of Adjustment has found that the front of Mr. Carroll's property is
The
hereby defined as.
259.91 foot property line.
And that would set the others, to keep it in accordance with our ordinance.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we've got another public hearing. We'll stay as Board of Adjustments. Is that right, Mr. Gayhagen?
No, for this one, it's actually going to be just a standard Board of Commissioners. You're changing the code, not, interpreting or using the code to interpret a specific
So we don't have to
item.
be Board of Adjustments again. The private drive can be a county commissioner thing too as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we will adjourn the Board of Adjustments and reconvene as Board of Commissioners. Mr. Gayhagen.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is a text amendment, TA 04-2017. The Planning Board is requesting a text amendment to Article 6, Section 3, subsection 3.2 of the county zoning ordinance, specifically to amend current variance standards to reflect state minimum requirements pursuant to general statute, add policies to ensure that variance approvals are filed with the Register of Deeds Office, and add a written application deadline. House Bill 276 significantly amended the enabling statute for variance requests, including a substantial change to variance standards. Every text amendment that comes through to the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Board requires review of the amendment as consistent with the future land use plan. The future land use plan in this particular case does not explicitly speak towards variances, but the plan does mention that it attempts a proactive planning approach that recognizes the current need to implement key policies. I believe that a key policy in any good future land use plan is a variance, because as we've discussed in the previous public hearing, you can't plan for every situation. In order to implement the policies, it's imperative that the ordinance is updated in this specific area to streamline variance requests and make sure that the future land use plan and its goals are upheld. In addition to recommending the variance standards, the Planning Board, at the request of staff, has requested that the Board of Commissioners amend the code to include provisions for filing the approval documents with the Register of Deeds. Staff did brief the Board of Commissioners on 3 possible options for recording the documents during the work session prior to this meeting. The minutes of that session, I believe, are recorded, and they would be available upon request for the clerk to the board if anyone wants to hear them. I will briefly summarize the options just for the public in attendance tonight. Option 1, the county works with the county's attorney's office to update the property deed itself to include approval information. This option ensures that approval information is clearly tied to the property and would not require a title search to find. However, it would come with a significant increase in variance application costs from $250 to $400. I believe I said $450 previously. That number is to be worked out depending on what the cost of the document preparation is. And it does come with some county liability as far as a mistake on the deed, the county has to change, something we always try to avoid. Option 2, the county records an approval document with the Register of Deeds, and the planning department notifies the tax department of the approval document to include a note in the tax card referencing that book and page. The variance increase cost for this would only go up about $50 to $300, and it would minimize or almost completely eliminate any county liability as the document's drafted completely in-house. Several local governments already have such a policy in place. Option 2 will almost certainly require a proper title search to locate the approval information, and the tax cards are not always used when conducting title work. Option 3 does not require the recording of any approval documents, only notifying the tax department of the approval to update the tax card to reflect the date of that approval. The planning board did review all 3 options, and in their meeting last month recommended option 2 as a function of moving this document forward to the Board of Commissioners for review. The planning board also recommended that a deadline for variance applications be added to the code. The recommended deadline for applications to be received is 20 working days prior to the meeting at which the variance will be heard. Right now, the code does not have any specific deadline for variance applications. It does mention applications for text amendments or for conditional use permits to be received no later than 14 working days. We do have to publish in the newspaper for any sort of variance application. So we do have to put that in with 2 consecutive calendar weeks. So it was decided 20 working days would give enough time to create, that advertisement and make sure all the documents are in order. I should mention that, and this is included in the agenda packet or in my staff report, that the requirement to publish for a variance hearing is not a state mandated standard. It is a standard that was put in our individual zoning code, perfectly legal for us to do that. So we actually do more than what the state requires. In this case, we are authorized to do that. The only reason that I haven't addressed that in this particular text amendment is that's actually a separate section of the code. And I personally feel that it's always a good thing to put the public on notice of any decision being made by the board in this type of capacity. I'm available to answer any questions the board might have on this matter.
Any questions? And for the record, we had a lengthy work session about this afternoon, so. Questions from commissioners? Not Mr. Gahagan, we'll let you go away from the podium and may call you back. Anyone from the public like to speak on this issue? This is a public hearing of the Board of Commissioners. Feel free to come up and speak on this text amendment issue. If not, anything else, Mr. Gahagan?
Yes, sir.
Commissioners, any discussion? It's the pleasure of the board.
Move to approve option 2 based on the information that we've received and discussion.
And the remainder of the text amendment, the items of the text amendment, correct?
Yes, it's a change of the entire section.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Have a motion, Commissioner Copeland, to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Matheny. Are there any discussions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We have another public hearing before the, and we'll stay with county commissioners. We have another public hearing before the county commissioners, and it's about naming a private drive in the El Dorado Township. Mr. Gahagan or Mr. Woodard? Okay.
General statute requires the county to hold a public hearing before it names a public or private road. And so that is the purpose of this public hearing. A Montgomery County ordinance requires the naming of a previously unnamed road when more than a certain number, in this case 3 dwellings, are on the property. In this case, Highway 109, we have 109 addressing. We're all familiar with how addressing works. Well, the spacing of those numbers will allow for 109 addresses down a private extension road. In this case, this road now has more structures, 4, And it's a county ordinance that each structure has to have a 911 address, which is a good thing. In case an ambulance, emergency personnel has to come, they will know exactly which structure you are in. And so now that this little road has exceeded that limit, it has to be named. And so the Board of Commissioners has the authority to give a name to that road. We have several criteria that we look at when naming roads. We want it to be of reasonable length. We want it to be easy to pronounce. We want it to be distinguishable. And then, more importantly, 3 other criteria. It is not offensive. That the road name given is not offensive to either the existing homeowners or to maybe future homeowners in the county. Number 2, the name given is not likely to be stolen. In a rural county, we do have a problem with road signs being taken down. Unfortunately, we've had some episodes with fatalities when road signs have been stolen, and so we try to avoid anything that's going to be popular that's going to end up on somebody's barn or bedroom wall. Number 3, we try to, most importantly, not give it a name that is similar to other names in the county. Again, it's for the purpose of emergency services being able to access that. So we try to give a distinct name. So when this process started, we looked at the database of the available names, and Brian Helms, who's the Information and Communications Director over the 911 Center, is here, and he can review that list of names, but it's a rather lengthy database of road names in the county. And so we try to come up with one that meets all those criterias, and so the recommendation from staff was Camino. I think Camino Lane was the recommended name. We always try to accommodate people in the area. Mr. Scott Maynard did contact Brian about some possible names for the road for the board to consider in addition to the one recommended from staff. I'll just read those names and the comments from staff on those. The first one was Forestry Lane, which is too similar to Forest Drive here in Troy. Longleaf Drive, there's a Longleaf Lane in Jackson Springs. Pine Tree Drive, popular name too. We have several streets that have pine in it across the county. Ranger Drive, that is not similar to any other county. It may possibly be one that would be stolen, Ranger Drive. Peacock Lane was a suggestion. We have a Peacock Drive in Star. Willow Lane, we have a Willowwood Lane in Mount Gilead. One Horse Lane was a suggestion from Mr. Maynard. Again, kind of broaching on one that would likely be taken down by thieves. And then Maynard Drive, which is obviously his last name. We don't have any other roads in the county, but again, it's a family name and a residence name, and not to say Mr. Maynard would ever steal it, but it could get gone at some point in time or vandalized or whatnot. But the board is certainly at their pleasure to give it any name that the board seems fit. And again, it's public comment period for anybody who wants to make other suggestions, and Brian is here with the database to check any possible names against other names in the county. But that is the criteria we use when naming a road or making a recommendation for a road.
Questions from commissioners or comments? None? Being none, anybody from the public like to speak on this particular road naming? Yes, sir, come forward, please. How you doing?
Good. Nice to see you, Jackie.
Good to see you, pal.
Scott
There you
Maynard.
go.
Scott Maynard, 4510 NC Highway 109 North. I just felt like Forestry Drive was a lot different than Forest Street, and that's really the only comment I have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Scott, appreciate your service to the county as well. Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else? If not, it's the pleasure of the board.
Could I ask Mr. Maynard, do you think, how many Maynards are there around here that might steal a sign if we named it Maynard Drive?
There's
one or two in the phone book, and I think they're in the Candor area, but
They're in
not
Jackson
Kendrick,
Springs.
so I can't really say how many of them there are.
Is there anyone else lives on that drive with a different last name?
We have a neighbor on 109, and actually, they don't use that drive. Well, they use it a little bit, but other than that, nobody else lives on the road.
Potential building?
Nothing in the,
Y'all own 2 of the 4 parcels, is that right?
that's correct.
Okay,
As far as I know, nobody planning on building
good deal. Thank you.
this lot.
Do you prefer Maynard or Camino?
Minor.
Anyone else? Do we have a recommendation in the way of a motion?
I'll make the motion, we name it Maynard.
We got a motion from Commissioner Crisco to name it Maynard Drive. Would that be correct? Maynard Drive? Maynard
Brian,
Lane,
was,
Maynard Drive?
That, you got the database, I know in your email to me, it was nothing similar to Maynard, but,
And, Brian, would that be better drive or lane? What's the drive?
There's really nothing.
Okay.
Got it either way.
Okay. So, Mr. Crisco, you made the motion?
Yeah,
Drive or lane?
whichever one they prefer. I don't know if they like lane or.
Drive, is that good for you, Mr.
That's
Crisco?
good for me.
We got a motion from Commissioner Crisco to name it Maynard Drive. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Copeland. Are there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we have a public hearing number 4, Mr. Woodard.
yes, sir, the purpose of public hearing number 4 is to receive public input on the proposed county financing to cover the interim cost of construction of Montgomery Central High School. General statute, speaking a lot about general statutes tonight, general statute requires any time the county to enter financing that it has to receive public input, and so we have to hold a public hearing. Obviously, we've already had a public hearing about construction of a high school. We've had a public hearing for USDA financing to pay for that high school. But as the board is well aware, the USDA is kind of unique. It buys the school from the county and finances it for the county at the end of construction. That leaves the county with the problem of how do we pay the contractors and all the people working on the construction until the point that the USDA buys it. And so Finance Director C.D. Krebs and his staff pursued the financing options, as the board is well aware of, as far as installment financing with loans as opposed to a bond issuance. We could not really get a lot of interest from banks because of the short duration, 24 months of the interim financing. And so the solution was to do a bond issuance. And so the board has in front of them, I think, and the clerk has added to the packet, the draft documents for this interim financing. But again, the purpose of this hearing is just to receive any public comment about a financing transaction. The board's already really approved both ends of this thing to fund a new high school and to use the USDA money to do it. But the public is welcome to get any response that the board wants to consider it. And then the motion would be to proceed with the installment financing agreement for construction of Montgomery Central.
Any questions from the board? Not anyone from the public wish to speak on this issue? That being said, the pleasure of the board.
I'll move to approve the agreement.
Got a motion from Commissioner Matheny to approve the installment financing. Do we have a second? I'll second. Are there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, next thing on our agenda is the manager's report. Mr. Woodard?
Yes, sir. If I may, we had a carry forward item from the work session earlier. I apologize for it not being on the consent agenda, but we just received notice after the agenda packets were published on Thursday that Harvey Mack was willing to accept the post. For the members of the audience, Montgomery County, as all counties, have a jury commission. And that jury commission is made up of 3 appointed persons. The Superior Court judge gets to appoint a representative to the jury commission. The clerk of court gets to appoint a member, and then the Board of Commissioners. The 2 members from the judge and from the clerk of court is Tammy Keelis and George Van. The Board of Commissioners, long-serving member, Mr. Elkins, has decided that he is no longer able to serve in that capacity, and so that left a vacancy. And the board put forth a series of names of upstanding people in the community, and the board chose to approach Mr. Harvey Mack about serving on the jury commission as its representative. Mr. Mack has agreed to accept the appointment by the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners to serve in that capacity, and we just need a motion, a second, for that approval.
We have a motion to approve Mr. Harvey Mack as on the jury commission.
So moved.
Got a motion from Commissioner Copeland, a second from Commissioner Wooten. Are there any discussion? Just in the way of discussion, would like to publicly say thank you to Sam Elkins for serving for a long time, did he not? He served, and he served us well. Right, any other discussion? Not all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Woodard?
I just want to touch on an update on the URA Volunteer Fire Department. Most of the audience should be familiar with the open letter to the public that the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners published, or the editor of the Montgomery Herald had published in this week ago Wednesday's paper, addressing how the board was going to handle the situation, that the board was going to be systematic and methodical and comprehensive, that it was an issue that had to be addressed, but it was a complex issue, and that fire protection service is vital to our communities, and that the board was going to pull together all the stakeholders, the municipal mayors, the managers, and the fire chiefs to address fire protection service holistically and how to deal with this. The response was almost immediate from the mayors from the 5 towns. They are very concerned about fire protection service and how any changes that the county may do may impact them and their residents. The county funds over $600,000 a year to fire protection services in Montgomery County. And so the mayors asked the chairman and I for an emergency meeting to discuss this. We met in the work session room today. The mayors that were not able to get off work or be in town sent the managers, and so we had representatives from Troy. We did not have one from Candor. Mayor Hearn could not make it, but we had the town manager, Greg Zephyr. We had Roy Manus. Mayor Miller from Mount Gilead sent the manager, Matthew Christian. Jimmy Blake, mayor from Bisco, was on the telephone. He sent in person Brandon Holland, who is the manager of Mount Gilead, and again, the chairman, myself, and the newspaper editor were there for that meeting. The mayors expressed their concern again that fire protection service, we're all volunteer-based county, and that they were wanting the county commissioners to do exactly what they're doing, being systematic, methodical, and comprehensive. Everyone there agreed that the flag was inappropriate and that it needed to come down. By the end of the meeting, everyone present agreed that the county's course of action was what was needed, and they agreed to participate in that public meeting. We're looking to have it at the Garner Center. Of course, we'll publish notice for this special called meeting, and we'll get that. We're probably looking at the first or second week of November based on availability of the Garner Center. But we were glad to have that to meet and to know that we have their support. Chairman, I don't know if you want to make any comments to that.
No, you covered it, Mr. Wood. It was well covered.
The other items, as always, the county reports, items A through H on the county manager's report. Staff, as always, is present to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions from the board?
Matthew, could you remind us what the status of our appeal for the Union County IBC?
I can. I spoke to the attorneys today regarding that matter. They asked if we were willing to go in with Stanley County for the review of the, what's that thing called, Chris? The environmental impact study. that as we prepare our briefs to go to court, yes, we hired Golder Associates to give that high-level overview, but we needed more in-depth examination of those documents, and Stanley County was wanting to split the cost with us on that. The cost was very reasonable, I felt, considering what we've already spent, that it's not to exceed $13,000 on our part to get that in-depth evaluation of the document. And so that would be crucial, according to our attorneys, for our appeal moving forward. So I authorized that expenditure. Stanley County's suit against the contract with Norwood. And so that's one angle that Stanley County took that we did not. We took the approach of notice to the people of Montgomery County, and that it was contrived and they reached a decision before they hired the engineers to do it, and that the study was flawed was our 3 points. Stanley County also feels that the contract between Union County and Norwood was illegal. That is set to be heard in December. The implications of that ruling may affect our ruling. So we're watching that one very closely. We're working with a partnership with Stanley County. Of course, while we may be sharing calls for information, we're not bound by any deal that Stanley County may reach, and they're not bound by any deal we reach. This thing was originally scheduled to be heard in November, but now it's been postponed into, I think, May, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll be several months before we get to the administrative office of the courts. But they're working on it and preparing all our briefs.
Just going to mention, the Charlotte Observer today had articles about 2 huge developments approved by the city of Charlotte. Again, a residential development and a mixed-use development. So it's just something I think we really need to keep an eye on, because I don't see how they're going to keep up with their water supply, which is right there.
And not to get into strategy here, but obviously one of our great concerns is, while we feel like we have a very good case that the people of Montgomery County were not given notice of this IBT transfer, we do know that Union County tried to go around the fence and pass legislation that, even if we'd have won, would have still allowed them to get the water. And so one of my concerns expressed to the attorneys was we need to make sure we watch on that legislative front. We need to continue discussions with Union County. Again, our position, the board's position has been, we're not opposed to growth. We want to grow as a county. It just has to be controlled, and to keep all those doors or lines of communication open. That we want to watch it on every front, not just be tunnel vision to a court case, but this thing can take a lot of changes real fast.
And Mr. Manager, another thing would be to be mindful of is the process in the future. And I think that's where Mr. Matheny was going, is, you know, we may or may not be able to do something with Union County, but as we believe, the process is flawed.
Yes, and that's a third front that we need to work as a county to our legislators. While other counties may be working to change the legislation to do away with all regulation, we need to make sure that good regulations are in place. So thank you.
Is Goodwin aware of our situation?
Very much so.
Very much.
Okay, he's on top of it. Good.
The delay of the court case being heard, are they free to proceed, or are they on hold until the courts decide?
Stanley County filed an injunction to stop anything. Our lawyers called me about 2 weeks ago to want to know if we wanted to pursue an injunction. The cost involved with an injunction and the likelihood of getting one passed, to me, was cost prohibitive. It's not going to affect the outcome of our case. Union County would be at the loss if they expended money. They're not to that point yet as far as securing everything they need. We obviously are on limited funds, and I didn't think the huge price tag that was thrown at me was worth that effort, that we need to focus. And that's what I asked the question today. I said, well, if Stanley County's approaching the science behind it, can we not narrow our focus just to notification? Again, an attempt to limit our expenditures, and their response to that was no, that they felt that our three-pronged platform was necessary moving forward. And again, when they gave me the cost, that it was not gonna be more than $13,000, then, you know, that was worth having a better case. Spending 5 digits or more than 5 digits on an injunction that was not really gonna get us anywhere, and the standard for an injunction is so much higher that I just didn't think it was worth it.
And it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, and the commissioners may know more about this than I do, because we've been involved and it's gone a lot of places, but this is going now before the administrative courts, which is an appealable, their decision's appealable as well. Okay.
I think maybe after the December case between Stanley County trying to say the contract's invalid would be a good time, once we get that verdict, to have a closed session to discuss strategy with Tom Terrell and Hayes family.
All right, anything else from the commissioners? One thing I'd like to say that come next Wednesday, the 25th, fortunately, the county manager, and I appreciate him doing this, called me a few weeks ago or a month or so ago, and the county has surplus vehicles. The Council of Aging, which we have a representative here, raise your hand back there, has surplus vehicles. And generally, those go to auction or to sale for a fee. Is that correct, Mr. Woodard?
Usually we put it up on the state surplus, and there is a fee associated with that.
And asked me if we would include them in one of our bank sales, and which there's no fee for. There's no hidden cost. Whatever they bring, the county gets to keep. And I'm a representative of the county, so I can auction those vehicles. What I'm telling you that for is the clerk has brochures, don't you, clerk?
Yes, sir.
And if anybody wants flyers, I'd strongly recommend the gentleman in the back there, if you'll come up when the thing's over and get you something to take with you. The vehicles are on display down behind the First Bank old corporate headquarters with all the descriptions on them. But that sale is this Wednesday at 10 o'clock. We always have a good crowd. We always have a pretty good sale. So hopefully they'll put some money back in the coffers and save the cost of the general auctions as we paid in the past. Anything else from the commissioners? Sure? If not, meeting is adjourned.